Back in the days when Maine was only knee-high as a state, when the caribou roamed its northwoods, and oysters thrived in the Daramuscata, when the woodsmen had scarcely seen the tall virgin pines of the Allagash, there came into the forest a huge giant of a man. Whence he came nobody knows, nor took the trouble to find out. He was the timber chopper such as it had never been seen before. More than a rod tall he stood in his moose-hide moccasins, and his shoulders were 3 regular axe handles wide. A heavy square-cut black beard decorated his chin, and his eyebrows resembled a bird's nest. Stories of his fame, indeed, soon were told from the Saco to the St. John, of how his mighty axe with the 2-foot blade could drop a tall pumpkin pine with one clean blow, and how he could clear 10 acres in a day, and 40 teams and 80 men were unable to yard the logs after him. Behind him, the squirrels wore a hungry look, and the beavers were a loss for food and building materials. The quiet trout streams either roared like torrents or dried up altogether. The spirit of the forest was worried, really worried. With this giant in action, there would soon be no trees left. With no trees, the water would soon wash away the earth, the winds blow away the topsoil, and the land would be left only barren rocks and sand. No gardens, no food, no people, no fish, no birds, no animals, no anything. So the spirit of the forest decided to call a council of all the other spirits to decide how they should best stop the destruction. The whole awful matter was discussed in the best spirit fashion, and it was agreed only probable weakness of the giant was in his stomach. From all his exercise, of course, he worked up a tremendous appetite, and the tales were being told of the cartload, or so, of food that he ate every evening when his day's work was done. So around this, the spirits laid their plan. As he chopped to the south, one day he came to the ocean. Now mind you, he was a backwoodsman and never tasted shellfish or Maine lobsters, so the spirits had arranged a huge clam bake for his meal. There were clams and oysters, crabs and lobsters, and with some misgivings probably, the giant fell to eating with both fists. The oysters, clams, and crabs he found to be hardly worth the trouble for one his size and appetite, but the lobsters pleased him to no end, after he got used to the looks of the strange creatures. Now, to a giant, one lobster is scarcely a taste. He was delighted by this new food, but bored by the task of picking out the meat. So before long, he just popped a whole one in his mouth and crunched it up. This was much easier, and he kept roaring and calling for more and more until he gobbled up 2 dory loads. Then he stretched out by the fire and went to sleep. This is just what the spirits had planned for. They had begged the help of an imp of mischief, whose golden eyes gleamed for fun. Over his long nose put a large lobster claw, and 2 more over his pointed ears. Another slipped one over his beard, and his face was painted sea green. The giant twisted and rolled in his sleep, for lobster shells are hard to digest, especially 2 dory loads. The imp of mischief, whose name, by the way, was Kattywumpus, sat on the giant's chest and tweaked his nose. The giant moaned in his sleep, dreaming of huge waving claws, bulging eyes, probing feelers, and many crawling legs like those of the strange creatures he had stuffed himself with. Suddenly, he awoke when he saw Kattywumpus crouched on his chest. He leaped to his feet with a roar that was heard from Cape Nettic to Monhegan. He crashed off through the forest, heading westward at top speed. Years later, tall tales of a similar giant, who had a pet blue ox, filtered back to the state of Maine from beyond the Great Lakes. Perhaps that is where he went, for he never was seen in these parts again. Kattywumpus was so pleased with himself that he continued to wear his disguise and to prowl the forests of New England as a protector. Many of the weird stories from lumber camps, such as the one about the footprints in the snow that suddenly vanished into the air, of the piercing screams from the top of the bunkhouse in the dead of night, and others are perhaps his doings. No one has ever caught a glimpse of him, but sometimes we see the gleam of his golden eyes on the outer circle of the campfire light. He is ever on the watch for those who would destroy the forest, land, and game by careless wanton or cutting or fire.